Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Elizabeth I's turbulent love life. Now, Elizabeth I is considered one of the greatest queens that England has ever had. She was the monarch who attempted to unite Protestants and Catholics inside of her land, but she had to deal with lots of threats from within England and abroad. Elizabeth, during her reign, saw off the Spanish Armada, the huge and famous invasion force sent from Spain to cause chaos on English shores, and she led like a warrior queen at the time. She was also famously the subject to the plots in which sought to instil Mary, Queen of Scots, onto the throne, with Elizabeth the target of the assassination attempts. But there was one question that plagued her reign, and it was whether the Queen actually took a lover, or whether she actually intended to marry. Elizabeth is regarded as the Virgin Queen, and she wore a ring to indicate that she was married not to any man, but to the service and duty to rule over England. But what was Elizabeth I's love life like? She was known to have liked a number of men, but she never once married, leaving England with a huge problem in the wake of her death, as to who would reign next and be her successor. In a speech to Parliament in 1559, Elizabeth stated that "'Tis shall be for me sufficient that a marble stone shall declare that a queen, having reigned such a time, lived and died a virgin." When her reign began on the 17th of November 1558, she was a young lady of only 25 years of age. It was believed that her reign would be long and prosperous, and also that she would give birth to the next successor to carry on the Tudor dynasty. But this is not what happened. The throne after her would pass through to the Scottish kings and queens, the Stuarts. As a young girl, there is much speculation with regards to Princess Elizabeth and also her brother's uncle, Thomas Seymour. Seymour married at the time to the Queen Dowager, the former sixth wife of Henry VIII, Catherine Parr, following Henry's death. Because of this, Thomas Seymour then became Elizabeth's stepfather, and he joined Catherine's household, and Elizabeth at the time was around 14 or 15. She continued living inside of Catherine Parr's household, but during this time there was some scandal as to inappropriate behaviour that occurred here. Thomas Seymour would visit Elizabeth often by himself, and in some early morning's visits, when no one was properly dressed, it was noted that Seymour inappropriately touched and tickled Elizabeth. The mid-30s Seymour, flirting with the teenage girl, but it's believed today that he groomed the princess. His visits are considered were unwanted by Elizabeth's part, and Catherine Parr did not confront her husband about his inappropriate activities. But Seymour later would be killed. There was a renewed interest from him following the death of Catherine Parr, and it was believed he wanted to marry Princess Elizabeth. He was later beheaded after being embroiled in a power struggle where he planned to seize the king, Edward VI. Elizabeth was questioned with regards to being involved with Thomas Seymour in the plot and his suspected plan to marry Elizabeth, but nothing was found against the princess. When Elizabeth became queen, she had a number of opportunities to marry at a number of times. She had many favourites, those men who she was close with, and whose it's considered she could have married, but each time this often ended up in disaster. The most famous and notable possible suitor for Elizabeth was Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. He was the Queen's great favourite, and the two had been friends since childhood. Dudley was well thought of at court. However, he was already married to Amy Robsart, but it was well debated at court that Dudley and the Queen would marry if his wife passed away. Now, she did pass away, but there was a significant amount of suspicion around the circumstances that she died, including the fact that she passed away whilst falling down the stairs. Much rumour emerged that she was in fact pushed down a flight of stairs, and it's alleged by some that it was Dudley who pushed her, as he wished to murder his wife to allow him to then marry the Queen, the true love of his life. But Elizabeth, it was known, was very jealous of the women close to Robert Dudley, and she did wish to have him for herself, but the rumours around the possible murder of his wife in September of 1560 caused there to be a huge degree of controversy around Dudley, to the point where an investigation even had to take place to ensure that nothing criminal occurred. Many suspected Robert for having arranged her death so he could marry Queen Elizabeth, but nothing was proven. A number of male courtiers also objected to the possible match, and it was considered that a rebellion made up of the nobility would occur if Dudley and the Queen were married. It's clear that the two, however, had a close fondness, and some historians even consider that Dudley may have slept with the Queen, making her moniker of the Virgin Queen redundant. But following his wife's passing, he was free to marry, but the scandal marred his chances in doing so. For the next 18 years he did not marry in the hope of securing the Queen's hand, and he continued to be a master courtier, being there with Elizabeth constantly. Dudley was even considered a suitor to Mary Queen of Scots as a consort to bring together peace between Scotland and England, but this never came to anything. He was so close to Elizabeth that when she became ill with smallpox in 1562, she asked the Privy Council to name Dudley as the protector of the realm. Elizabeth was confronted with other marriage proposals and suggestions from abroad, but she refused, stating that she still wished to marry Dudley, but he would offend the Queen on an unimaginable scale. He had been known to have flirted with Lettice Knollys, and following the death of her husband, the Earl of Essex, the two got together and married in secret in the September of 1578. Knollys and Elizabeth were very close, and the marriage of her favourite to one of her best friends cut Elizabeth deeply. She never accepted it, and slandered Dudley at court. She remained fond of him, but she never got over the betrayal. Knollys was banished permanently from court, and looking at images of her and Elizabeth, it is interesting to consider the similarities between the two with regards to their appearances. Elizabeth could not win when it came to men and marriages. If she had married, then she would have been forced to have passed over parts of her power, and she did not wish to do this. If she married someone from abroad, she risked the threat of a foreign ruler imposing his will over England and the government. For example, she entertained the idea of a proposal to marry King Eric XIV of Sweden, and a Danish match for her had previously been mentioned. A marriage to Prince Frederick, the later Frederick II, was also proposed, but nothing came to anything. It was considered for years also that she considered seriously marrying Charles II, the Archduke of Austria, but relationships then deteriorated. Francis, the Duke of Alençon, was also considered, and it's claimed that she was also fond of him. She claimed that she would marry him, but overnight changed her mind and had second thoughts. It was even claimed that she gave him her ring and kissed him on the mouth, but the marriage did not take place. Philip II, the husband of her half-sister Mary I, was also considered to bring about an alliance between England and Spain and to pacify the Spanish. But ultimately, the proposal was refused too, as Elizabeth refused to convert her country back to Catholicism and to marry her sister's widower. But the last possible suitor for Elizabeth I was Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex. He and the Queen flirted a number of times, and he was significantly younger than she was. He was first noticed in 1584 when his stepfather brought him to court, and despite his youth, he and the Queen were very close. She considered him a favourite, and it was said that, even at night, Devereux is at cards or one game or another with her, that he cometh not to his own lodgings till the birds sing in the morning. But Devereux did not meet a good end. He annoyed the Queen, and he married Frances Walsingham in 1590, but he was driven by power. He was linked in 1601 to a coup against the Queen, and she convicted him of treason, and he was beheaded in London. He was allowed a simple beheading rather than a hanging, drawing and quartering. Ultimately, Elizabeth I died a queen without any heirs or any husband. so following her plans were drawn up to hand the throne across to the Stuarts of Scotland. Elizabeth, although she is known for being the Virgin Queen, she died a queen who had defeated Spain and had left England in a much stronger place than when she inherited it. She is a queen today considered one of the best monarchs that England has ever seen. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.